Gentlemen, welcome to the Be the Man podcast. This is your host, Greg Denning. Today, we are going to dive into what it means to be a world-class dad and to become the father that your children deserve. And we're going to talk about strategies and mindset and ways to make this work to be really, truly effective, and what that looks like and what it means. There's endless stories, and I'll share some of them, my own stories and stories I come across and I hear very often. Man, this has got to be the most important work there is. And we talked about, last episode, we talked about the most important relationship in your life with your wife. And perhaps the only thing more important than that is the relationship you have with yourself. Because if your relationship with yourself is off, it limits and retards the relationship you have with your wife, and then the two of you with your children. But before we dive in, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to this podcast. You can leave reviews, share it with friends and colleagues and family, anyone who you know could benefit or needs to know or would be excited to know the things we're talking about. You can connect with me on social media, on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. You can send direct messages there. You can email me through my site or our family site, extraordinaryfamilylife.com or gregdenning.com. On the social or emails, you can shoot me specific questions that you'd like me to address in a podcast, or even a guest that you would recommend. I've got a great lineup coming up of interviewing incredible people who've done amazing things that will help all of us be the man. So you can reach out that way, and as always, I'm here to help, to serve. This is part of my life's work, to help us all be our very best. So this episode is feeling poignant and real right now because my daughter came home from a volleyball tournament. She's on a club volleyball team, and she came home from a tournament recently and had some quite sad experiences in talking to her teammates, and it really struck her, forcefully, mentally, emotionally. She's been seeing the patterns, she's been hearing them, she's been noticing what's going on, she's been getting to know her team better. And this isn't a rare story, gentlemen, you know that. What I'm about to share isn't the occasional thing that's happening here and there, in random places in schools or teams or bands or orchestras or choirs or whatever. This is more common than not, and that is the tragedy. She came home and was saying how throughout the day they were having conversations, and it's been ongoing, but really just kind of came to a head as the girls were all talking, and she said every single one of them had said hateful things about their parents, and particularly about their dads. And they had really unhealthy relationships or no relationship with their dads, and many of them just were filled with this bitterness and hatred. They despised their fathers for their father's behavior. And many of the girls have some real trauma, psychological, emotional trauma because of it. Things like suicide attempts or self-harming, or just deep struggles that no child should have to have forced upon them because of the neglect of a parent. And my daughter just sat there and said, I hear you, and I am genuinely sorry for you. She's like, but I love my dad, and I love my mom, and I love my family. We have a great relationship, right? And she came home and told us that story, and I felt it because I grew up that way, and I've been around it, and I've seen it, and I've worked with it, and you've seen it, and you've experienced it. Many of you grew up without the ideal parent situation. And that has to stop. at a social level, in an ideal world, at a global level, but it has to stop with you or start with you in becoming that great dad. So no matter where you're at in your fatherhood journey, whether you're starting out or you've got grown kids, it's never too late to get better. It's never too late to be world class. And if you have made mistakes, which I'm sure you have, as I have, we can make those mistakes better. We can be our best. And we must think carefully, consider thoughtfully what is at stake with you in this role as father. Who needs you to be great, and what do they need, and what is the cost if you fail to level up? Good dads, gentlemen, are unbelievably rare. Be one. In fact, be better than good. Be extraordinary. I'm inviting you, calling you, challenging you to quite literally become one of the best dads on earth. And I'm serious. I'm not using those words lightly. So thinking about my daughter's experience and what those girls were saying about their dads, it invites each of us to ask ourselves, what would your children say about you? Right now in this moment. Your older kids, what would they say, or what do they say to their friends about you and their experience with you in their childhood? What will they remember? And here's what's significant. They might remember things and you're like, no, that's not accurate. But it almost doesn't matter because that's their reality. And so you have to be so great in a sense that not only can it not be misunderstood or misinterpreted, but that they can't see it any other way. Right? Are you with me? Like there's no room for doubt because the way they remember it, that's their reality. That's what they take with them for the rest of their life. No, that's not fair. Which is all right, right? Because life is not fair. Like I love to say, fair is where pigs win ribbons. Life isn't fair. That's not fair. But good. You didn't actually want a fair fight, did you? You didn't actually want this fair shot. You want the challenge. To be so good that you can't be misunderstood. To be so good that your mistakes are just dismissed, forgotten. Because you're so good. Great, extraordinary. So what characteristics would you like to define your fatherhood, your time in this role, this position? What characteristics and attributes would you like? Noble? You want to be a noble father? Classy, present, fun, attentive, engaged? How do you want to be remembered? Have you thought about that? Have you written that down? Have you written down the characteristics of a truly great father that you want to be? And not just in general, that you want to be for your children. Have you thought about what it means to them and what they want or need? That's a question worth thinking about and writing about a lot. It's like, what does each of my children need from me? What do you think each child would want most from you during their childhood? This is something that has to go in the journal. fellas, spend some time writing about this, please. I'm being sincere here. Take part of your morning or evening routines and write about each child and what you think each child would want from you during their childhood, during their teen years, during their young adult years, and during their adult years. Now, some of you have young children, and to think of them even as teens seems so far away, or young adults, right? And man, those years fly by. Our oldest has already moved out. She's doing her own thing and doing fantastic, right? And so sooner than I ever thought possible, there she is. She's out on her own. And I have to think about, fatherhood continues and will always continue. As long as I live or my children live, fatherhood continues. And so I need to keep being a father, and I need to keep leveling up. Man, if there's something I could just shout from the rooftops, if I had a moment to talk to every father on earth, I'd say keep leveling up. Keep rising so that you can continue to be a great dad. Because if you stop growing, your kids are going to outgrow you. And that happens all the time. In fact, it happens so often that by the time the kids are teens, they're looking sideways at you and then down at you. Literally and figuratively, because you stop growing and they're growing, and they're like, where are you going? What are you doing? What are you becoming? What are you doing with yourself? What are you making of yourself? And if you're making nothing, then they don't respect you anymore. And what they need from you, they can't get because you don't have anything to offer. Or you have very little. And the worst is if you think you have a lot to offer and you actually have very little to offer, and they need you, and you can't even show up because you can't even take care of your own crap. You haven't even got your own crap together. How are you going to help them? And they know that. They see that. Even as kids, they can pick up on it and be like, man, you don't even have your own crap together. How can I trust you? How can I rely on you? Right? And speaking of trust is always built on two things: character, and you better have that. You better be constantly developing and cultivating that. They can trust your character. And then competence. That's the second piece of trust. You have to be competent enough in a lot of things so that they can trust you in those things. And competence in one area does not carry over to another. You might be very competent in helping them with their fitness, and very incompetent at helping them with their finances. My invitation, my challenge, my call to you, a call to arms, so to speak, is to cultivate your own competence in all those areas so your kids can rely on you, they can trust you, they can turn to you. And the things that they're going to need from you in your teen years or young adult years or their adult years, think through that one. Because that's going to give you your game plan and your strategy for becoming that man. It won't happen automatically, gentlemen. It won't. So, man, the most common mistake I think people make is they just assume they'll get better with age. But it's just not true. Most people just get older. They don't get better. Getting better requires deliberate practice that we're going to talk about here in a minute. And if your adult children need you to be able to mentor them through business or marriage and life, you've got to lead the way. And they will know because they see it. And they see you in all those settings. And tragically, what children often see is the leftovers, when you aren't at your best. And in my mind, there's no distinction here. Like I'm not one way at work and one way at home. I'm not one way out in public and another way in private. I'm not, I'm not my A game and then my B game. I don't have a B game, especially at home. If you've slipped into that or even deliberately lived that way of like, oh yeah, when we go out in public, when I'm working, I'm doing those things, I'm on my A game. Then at home, I can just be my worst self. Like, what are you thinking? That kind of thinking makes me want to grab the front of your shirt and get right up in your face and say, brother, That's unacceptable. Your home should be the most sacred place on earth. Should demand your absolute best behavior. But as long as you're awake, you should be on your best behavior. Being your best self. And some of you might be thinking, when do I just get let down and just check out? And when do I get to not have to strive and put in the effort to be my best? And never. Like when you die, you can rest. Right? Now, I'm not saying we don't have rest and recovery and downtime and personal time, but when is there ever time you don't want to be your best? That's the lazy side of your mind thinking. No, that's the pathetic side. Let's just call it what it is. There's a pathetic voice in your head. It's like, I just want to just let down my guard and just be and blah. That doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit you. It doesn't benefit your marriage or your kids. Especially doesn't benefit your kids. If you've gotten in this rhythm of being blah at home, stop now. Don't ever do it again. When you wake up, be deliberate about being your best self. As long as your heart is pumping and your lungs are breathing, be your best self. If that sounds exhausting to you, then step up. Be a man. Man, I get fired up about this. It's because we let ourselves off the hook, and we mentally and physically want to be lazy, want to let things slide and take the easy route. Can't I just take it easy for a while? No, you can't, man. Well, yeah, of course you can, but there are consequences. And this take it easy style of parenting leads to disasters. Ooh. So, what will your children remember? What will be imprinted forever in their psyche? What is being imprinted right now? What do you want them to remember from each stage of life? And most of the world grows up with bad dads or no dads. Prison statistics are amazing. I think it's well over 80% of prison inmates, when they did some research, they found that they grew up with no real father figure in their lives. And divorces are off the charts, of course. Dads are bad examples. I think it's far more common. I think it's safe to say for us it's far more common to have a poor father figure and poor parenting example than a good one. So be the father you didn't have but you wish you did. My parents divorced when I was really young, like a toddler. Stepdads came and went. I growing up, didn't really have a great father figure. I do remember, and I hadn't thought about this until this morning when I was thinking about this. We lived across this field from my grandpa when I was really little, and I had never really thought about it until right now. It just really clicked for me that he had this garage and workshop over there in his orchards, and he was always out working. In fact, I think he was retired in my childhood. I can't remember him working, but I remember him being there. And now I'm realizing how patient he must have been to these fatherless children, because stepdads came and went. We were always broke, and we didn't have a dad or stepdad that came around to teach us anything. He must have been so patient in this workshop. He had so many tools and so many things, right? And we got to do a little bit of exploring around the workshop and around the orchards and the chicken coop and those things. We got to play, but he was endlessly fixing our flat tires. There was thorns everywhere, and we're always out riding our bikes. And he must have been so patient, or at least he did it. Because that's the thing I remember from my grandpa. He was He was willing to fix those flats all the time. And then he taught me how. He taught me how to use tools as well as you could a child. But I remember even as a very young teenager, I remember this day I met this older guy who was in his early 20s, had no idea how to change a flat tire. I must have been 13 at the time or 14, thinking, come, what? You don't even know how to do that? But it was because my grandpa had stepped in and taught me that. And so, that's a beautiful thing right there. And he stepped in, and then along my journey through my teens, there were other great men who reached out and put an arm around me and shared and, gave that example of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a dad. And I remember specifically as a teen, when I was out on my own, being so envious of people who had fathers, especially good ones. I didn't know how to shave. I ended up eventually asking a friend, I'm like, hey man, how do you shave? Right, little things like that. I never, brought a date home to meet my dad. Never got the dating advice from a dad. Right, all those little things, and I remember that poignantly, and that was this driving force for me as a teen of the kind of dad I wanted to be. Because of the things I did not have, I made lists and worked on it and made commitments to myself, to God, to the universe, to my future children of how I would be as a father. So be the father your children deserve. And gentlemen, if you had a good dad, or especially a great one, you have an advantage that you had better be using in your favor. And interestingly, it's not even that hard to be a good dad. That's the minimum standard. You can be a merely good dad on your worst days. Otherwise, set your standard crazy high and be that man. Be that father. Because good is not good enough. Not when great is possible. Refuse to settle for good. In fact, don't settle for anything less than extraordinary. That, of course, will require you to get the knowledge and the tools and the training and the skills to do it. And that will require years of study and practice, just like any other valuable skill. None of you would expect to be a truly great at sports or a musical instrument or in your craft with just a few minutes of weak practice a few times a week. Right? You get this. You get it conceptually. There are no Olympic athletes or people in professional sports, your favorite sports teams or players or the greatest musicians or artists. None of them got there by a little bit of weak practice here and there, when it was convenient, when they felt like it. No way. I had the opportunity to sit next to an Olympic gold medalist several years ago, and we were on a flight together. She sat next to me. She had set a world record and won the gold medal for speed skating, and she did speed skating in the Winter Olympics and cycling in the Summer Olympics. And we talked about her training, because I love training. I love finding out how people become great. And she said, "Oh yeah, it's 7 days a week. I don't get a day off." And I'm like, well, what about food? What about all this stuff? And she's like, yeah, you don't have these meals where you're like, nah, I'm not gonna eat well today. I just feel like binging. I'm just gonna slam all these donuts right here because I just feel like eating a lot of donuts right now, so I'm gonna go for it. So you don't do that. It's 7 days a week. You're always on. You're always in training. Everything you do is affecting your performance. And so you're always watching everything you do. What a fantastic example for us as fathers. Everything you're doing can affect your ability to be a great father. Think about that. Down to what you're eating. Yes, it will affect you. Absolutely will. So eating and exercise and what you're reading and what you're doing, how you're spending your time, your thoughts, your emotions, the level of patience you have and clarity and charity and perspective, and on and on. Ooh, it is so important that we work harder on ourselves than we do on anything else. There's many great books out there about deliberate practice. One in particular that I really enjoyed was, I believe it came from the book. It's called So Good They Can't Ignore You. I believe that's in there, where he really talks about deliberate practice. He's like, there's a big difference between just kind of practicing and then deliberate practice. And you know the difference. You know what I'm talking about. There's a difference between, going to the gym for a workout and a really great workout. There's a big difference. And there's a big difference between kind of just going through the motions of your craft and then really practicing and acquiring the skills of your craft. And this is what separates true craftsmen from people in the field. And great salesmen who will, they take the top 1 or 2%, take, 80 or 90% of the sales, right? The great investors. There's a difference. And I want you to discover that difference for you and be that guy. Be the top 1% or better of fathers in the world. I mean this seriously. I'm not just throwing this out here as empty words. Figure out what it takes and be deliberate about your study and your practice. Be one of the best dads on earth. And make it count. Don't just wing it. None of us can afford to wing it. This is the most important work you do. When I think about my children, I was up really late last night thinking about them. In fact, I couldn't even go to bed. Just thinking about how much I love my children, how much I value each of them, how precious they are to me, how deeply I want them to be happy and successful. I want them to live great lives. And the advantage we have is the vantage point that we have of having, been there, hopefully, when they were born, as I was, right? We had our children at home or in birthing centers. We just wanted that quiet, peaceful birth experience, and I was right there, literally, to catch my kids. So the very first moment they came into life, obviously they were alive inside Rachel, which is amazing, and she had that privilege to create and carry. It's so special, so sacred. But the first moment outside of the womb was in my hands. Whoa! Man, I've never really articulated it this way before. We adopted our oldest, so we missed that when she was 5 days old. But the very first exchange, when we went to the airport to pick her up, her birth mother handed her to me. So into our life and into this world, the very first thing was into my hands. Man, that is sacred and special to me. And we can use that as this metaphor, this imagery for what we're talking about today. Like this beautiful baby, this miracle of life into your hands. The very first thing in life was coming into my hands. Whoa, man, I'm feeling that right now. And I want you to take that kind of responsibility. These kids are in your hands. And what they experience and how they turn out in a major way is in your control. And yes, of course, your wife plays a role here. But that does not excuse you or dismiss you from your role. And for the most part, most men need to step it up and have more of an active role. So here's some invitations. Think through each outcome you want. What is it you want? All the outcomes as a family. What do you want your family culture, your family dynamics to be like? What do you want each kid to experience with you? What do you want your relationship with each child to be like? This takes time, effort, and thought. I hope you didn't think it wouldn't. I think most, well, maybe not most, but a lot of men, they don't want to be bothered by that. Like, oh, I'm busy. Or maybe they think they're too busy. I got to do this, I got to do that. They're running around, they're putting out fires, they're taking care of all these things, and they never stop to think through it. And if you say, hey, man, you need to give that some thought. Oh, I'm too busy. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be bothered by that. But if you don't want to be bothered by it, if you don't want to think through it, you'll never get the results. It's not going to happen automatically. It's definitely not going to happen by default. And it's not going to happen by accident. You're not just going to wake up one morning and be like, whoa, how did I get here? This is amazing. I'm a world-class dad by accident. It must be deliberate. So think through each outcome you want. The relationship you want with each child. The outcome you want for each child with multiple things. Each child's going to have unique strengths and weaknesses. Address that in writing. You really should probably have a journal dedicated to fatherhood where you're writing and thinking about this. I've done lots of writing and thinking about my kids over the years. In fact, I have we created what we call a parent mentor journal, where you're parenting, but you're also mentoring your kids. And we would write about each child and what they need and what their strengths and weaknesses were and where we're at on their journey. And Rachel and I still talk about that. And then I talk about it with the kids. And we take one of our children out on a date every week. Just the two of us, Rachel and myself, with one child. And we get to talk to them and just say, hey, how's it going? How's life? What are you working on? What are you excited about? What are you struggling with? And they just open up and they talk, and we have this beautiful relationship. We get to see where they're at. Think through each outcome. Most fathers simply are not strategic enough. So carefully consider the outcome and then ask yourself how you can achieve that, right? What's the outcome? If you want the family dynamics, if you don't want... So I got a question recently. Like, how do I get my family culture? This was the question. How do I get my family culture to be one where violence against siblings is simply not an option, right? He said, I'm so tired of the kids hitting and kicking and hurting each other physically. And man, I get it, right? Kids, if they don't know how to communicate, well, the little ones, right? Their only form of communication is like crying. And then when they're little, if they don't know how to communicate, they turn to violence. It's really fascinating. The same is true of men. If men, just men and mankind really, if we don't know how to communicate, we turn to violence. And physical force and violence is the lowest form of communication. It's the last resort, and it should absolutely be the very last resort. But people turn to it so often and so quickly because they don't have other tools or skills. Parents turn to violence and force because they haven't cultivated the other skill set. So if your kid won't listen to you and you can't persuade them and you can't use gentle persuasion and words, then you just force them to do it. And man, I see dads do this all the time. They yell at them, they bark at them, they give the dad lecture, they grab them and move them like, get over here. Sometimes they smack them around. I'm like, man, that's the absolute last resort, and you should never have to go there. Or almost never. Like if you're going there often or quickly, it's because you lack skills, man. That's on you. So if that's the outcome, for example, let's dive into that one. If you don't want your kids to fight, then identify it, right? Which, awesome, this is what's done. The father who wrote this in was like, hey, how do I create that? It's like, boom, he's already identified it. He's like, I don't want my kids being violent with each other. So then you start asking a question, and what's really cool is your mind will start looking for the answers. You'll activate your reticular activating system, and your subconscious will start your mind will literally start going to work. That's how the brain works. It'll just start looking for answers, right? Because you're asking the right question. And so then, but phrase the question like, oh, I wish my kids would stop fighting. How can I get them to stop fighting? You just ask the question like, what do I need to do? What can I do to help and teach my children not to fight? And one of the keys is teaching them how to communicate, teaching them how to control and direct their thoughts and their emotions. Well, what's happening most often is they're feeling all this intense emotion. They've got this blur of thoughts, and their only way they think this will work is just lash out, right? So that's what's going on. That's the process. You know what's interesting? Most often that comes from parents. So we really have to stop and you always first thing, I know I'm using that little phrase there weird, always first, right? It's not just first and then go on to others. It's always first. The always first thing to do is to work on yourself. Always. That will never change. Always focus on you. Work harder on yourself than you do on anything else. And look to yourself. Always look to yourself first. If there's a problem with your kids or your family dynamic, always look to yourself first. See if there's something that you do that might be interpreted into what they do. So parents yell because they get an effect, right? It has an effect. They're like, rah, they yell and they get angry and they get the effect. Like, wow, okay. And they spank. So why do parents yell and spank? Well, because it works. At least temporarily, in the short term. It gets a reaction. And so the primal brain is like, oh, man, that worked. I'm gonna keep doing that when I need to. I'll keep yelling, I'll keep spanking because I get a reaction. But that's the lowest form, right? Spanking, yelling, barking, grabbing, physically moving a kid, that's the lowest form of communication. So the reality is you have to level up your skills in communicating, and by doing so, you're going to teach and model what you're modeling, right? You're setting the example, but you're going to teach and mentor and lead the child to communicate differently. If a child is doing something, you have to ask yourself, where did they learn that? It's most rarely, if ever, automatic. Where did they learn those things? Where have they seen that? And early on in our parenting journey, I started to see those things very quickly with our two oldest. And I saw the interaction. I was like, that is horrible. And then it occurred to me they had learned that, not that specifically, but they had observed our behavior and then taken their own little interpretation and action of it, right? And I saw our oldest daughter teaching our oldest son, or interacting with our older son when she would get angry and do things. I was like, oh man, that's got to stop. And then it clicked for me, like, oh, they're learning that from me. And so the way you interact with your kids and the way you teach and lead is being interpreted into their actions and behaviors. So if the outcome you want is less violence in this example, or kindness, or again, go through, what do you want? You want them to be serving, you want them to be thoughtful, you want them to be considerate, you want them to share, you want them to be generous. You want them to have a good attitude. You want them to be optimistic. The vast majority of what children do and become, they get from their parents. I know that's sobering. And you might in your head like, well, I don't do that. Well, you don't do it that way. But kids pick things up. And so you've got to work on yourself first and get that lined up. So as you're asking, what's the outcome I want? What do I need to do about it? Well, in this instance with the violence, for example, like my kids don't fight, right? These little teeny squabbles, and we just quickly jump in and talk through them, help them just settle their emotions. We give them expression. We ask questions, and we help them walk through the process. Nobody did that for me. Nobody did that for my wife. It's one of the rarest things on earth. Is where are you taught, right, to process your thinking and process your emotions? To walk through, okay, what's happening? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's going on? How might you do that differently? Right? Because what happens is the siblings fight. So one of the parents jumps into the fight in a different form, right? It's just a different way of fighting. And, oh, you over here, you stop doing that, rah, 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 rah. Right? And I saw that recently. Saw some interactions out here on our travels. I was like, come on, man. I see it all the time. All you have to do is just go out in public and you see plenty of examples of poor parenting. We were at church recently and saw a dad just reach in the van, grab his kid, yank him out violently, just throw him on the pavement there as they were going into church. And I get it. Maybe the dad's lost patience, and maybe the kid's being rough all morning. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I don't know the details. But how ironic to be in the church parking lot ready to go into, supposedly to go in to worship God and feel the Spirit, and doing that to kid. What does the kid learn from you? What does the kid learn about church? And it's, again, like it's not, well, I don't teach anything. That's the lesson right there. Yanking the kid out of the van onto the pavement to go into church, that's the lesson the kid gets. Not all this stuff about church is so important. We should feel the Spirit. Like, whatever. I mean, this is just one example here. But what lesson does that child take away from that experience going to church? And what lesson does that child take away now about parenting and about how to get what you want and how to respond when somebody really bothers you? You with me? So look through your own behavior and say, what am I doing that's being interpreted? Or what am I doing that's sending the message? How am I contributing to this issue? Which is such an important question. And sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time you're like, well, I don't have anything to do with this. But it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn who wrote the Gulag Archipelago about his time in the Russian gulags, the torture camps. And he was in there for years. So he went and fought for the Russian army against the Nazis. And then that crazy, psychotic tyrant took all the soldiers that had fought, put many of them, if not most of them, into torture camps after the war. So they fought for Russia, and then he took his own soldiers and put them in there, in these torture camps. Most of them died. And so Solzhenitsyn had been in there for years, and then he got super sick, and he was just dying. He's laying on his deathbed in this camp. And he just has this experience. He's like, how did I contribute to this? How am I personally responsible for the existence of these torture camps? Right, which is a very difficult and profound question, because you think, I didn't do anything to do this. I don't want nothing to do that. I'm not like this. But he starts thinking through, and he says, I realized, like, years ago, we all became passive and permissive. We kept quiet when things started getting out of hand. We didn't stand up and fight back and say, oh, no, this is absolutely intolerable. We won't accept it. He says, we went along with it. We went along with the little injustices. And he realized, he came to this conclusion. He's like, yeah, I played my part in allowing this to happen. I had a role. in this. And we have to do that, gentlemen, as fathers. Like, we see something in our children. What was your role? How did you either make that happen or allow it to happen? And you might say something like, well, that's, they picked this up at school. Well, who sent them to school? Well, they got this from their friends. Well, who allowed them to do that? Or who set them up there? Who? See, this is where I get into this, gentlemen. Who chose to live there? Well, it's my job. Whatever. Don't play the victim. You can live wherever you want. You can work wherever you want. You can go wherever you want. You're not a victim. If you don't like the area you live in, move, man. Why get my job? Get a different job. Get a different career. Well, I can't. Then that's your fault if you can't. Own that crap. All of it. Every bit of it. If you need new skills, get new skills. If you need a new career, do whatever you have to do to get a new career. If you need a different look, go somewhere else, man. Own this. Like, if you're like, well, it's good. My kids like this because it's not the best neighborhood. Go to a different neighborhood. If you don't like the school, go to a different school. If you don't like that, get them out of school. Like, do whatever you have to do to give your kids the success and happiness they need. Stop following the social patterns that just don't work. And specifically that aren't working for your kid. It blows me away that parents keep doing the same thing, hoping for a different result, and the kid just does not thrive in that, and they keep doing it because, well, they say things like, well, I was afraid my child would get behind, or well, this is what everyone's doing. Well, they expect me to do that. And you hear all these social expectations, and so you keep sending your kid to do things and having your kid do things because of these social expectations, and clearly it doesn't work sometimes at all, but particularly for that child or your family. Don't keep doing it. You are not a victim. You can do whatever you need to do. And man, please do whatever you have to do. Make that commitment to your children, to your family, to fatherhood. Do whatever it takes. If you have to take a child and go, this was my thing when my kids were little. I'd always said, like, man, I'll do whatever I have to do. If I have to take a child and go live on Mount Kilimanjaro, so be it. And I meant it, and I still mean it. You can figure out what needs to be done. So what's causing the problem? How are you participating in the problem? Start with you first. Fix you. Fix your issues. This yelling and barking, man, it just doesn't work. I saw it really recently, like yesterday, the day before. The kids were just misbehaving, and so the dad's like, "Hey, knock it off! What did I tell you about that?" And he kind of just barked at him, and I was observing. I'm like, "What's the response?" And no shocker to any of us, there was no change in behavior. None. Right? I'm like, well, that worked, clearly. Right? But you see all the time, and that's the iconic dad response, right? What's the most iconic dad parenting you can think of, right? You guys know because you see it and you might even do it. And I want you to think about that. Like, what's your parenting style? Do you have one? What's your parenting strategy? Do you have one of those? And it might be, as in many cases, it's just reactive. You just react and you bark and you do the dad lecture. You might go over there and grab them and threaten them and knock it off. And what's the effect? Well, it doesn't work at all. It doesn't work at all. And so if what you're doing doesn't work, actually, let's reframe that. Oh, it totally works. It does exactly what it's supposed to do, right? But it's not what you want. And it's not what you want for your kids. So what you're doing, it does what it's supposed to do. So if you bark and yell and dad lecture and grab your kids and throw them around and spank, oh, it's having an effect, but it's definitely not the effect you want. And if you're being rough and doing those kind of things, just barking all the time, yelling, scolding, hitting, pushing them around, using physical force, again, that's the lowest form of communication. It's the last resort, which people turn to as the first resort because they get a reaction. And this is what I call dictator parenting, right? And if you're a dictator dad and you use the lectures and the threats and those speeches and the reprimands, and it never works out well in the long run, right? Using fear, demanding obedience it's ineffective if you want healthy, solid kids and you want a relationship with them. It just won't work. So be more thoughtful, more strategic. Develop the skills. Constantly ask yourself, what is the outcome we want? How can I get it? Always look to yourself first. See what you can do differently. And analyze, like, what's happening? What's happening here? Why are the siblings fighting? Why does this child feel this need to rebel? Like, what's going on? Why is this child so angry? Why is this child so passive? Why is this one so destructive? Why is this one so chaotic? Why is this one disengaged? Like, be thoughtful about it, man. And study child psychology. And study what's going on. So that if you can see it and you can understand it and realize, you know what? This child's disengaging. This child's causing, tons of chaos and wreaking havoc in our house like a little tornado. Most often they're just starving for attention. They're not getting the attention they need. And I'm going to say this really boldly, and I mean it. That's, chaos and problems and disorder and anger and rebellion. That is not the natural state of a child. People have come to assume that teenagers are just rebellious and hormonal and emotional and they're all over the place. It's crazy. Those are hard years. Hope you survive them. That kind of crap. I hear that all the time. Toddlers are so hard and the terrible twos. I think 2-year-olds are amazing. They're some of the most special human beings on earth. I never had a terrible 2-year-old, and I've never had a terrible teen. If kids are rebelling, it's because something's wrong. Most often, you're doing something wrong. If your toddlers are all over the place, if your kids are fighting, if they're screaming and yelling, and there's chaos and mayhem and a lack of, if there's a lack of peace, is what I'm going to say, there's tension and fighting and mayhem in your house, that's not the natural state. Something is off. You're doing something wrong, or you're not doing something right. It could be just there's something you haven't done yet. Kids are awesome, man. And I know some of you are like, well, you don't have my kids, and you don't have one of these special kids, and this, whatever, man. Yeah, I don't have to get into the details here, but we've had our fair share of challenges and difficulty. I mean, we've adopted interracial adoption, and we have a very unique and different lifestyle from travel to educating at home to like on and on, right? We've created tons of unique and different circumstances. So we've had our fair share. It's not like we weren't the cookie cutter family, right? And I don't want you to think that, because I hear that often too. Like, oh, well, it's easy for you. You're lucky. You just got good kids, and you got this, whatever. I've worked through all of that stuff. It's really about strategy. Sincerely, it is. And there's so much you can do, but you have to do it, and you have to look at every possible contingency. This is what's amazing. Just one simple thing. There are so many behavioral problems in children that are coming from the low quality food they're eating. So the first place to look is like, what are you feeding them? Yeah, you. What are you feeding your kids? Right? You're responsible for that. Be responsible for what goes in their mouths and what comes through your front door and into your pantry and your fridge. And where you're stopping for food. it is having an effect on your kids, on their cognitive abilities, literally. Food is fuel for the body and the brain, and your kids' cognitive abilities and their behaviors are being affected by food. So that's the first place to start with parenting, right? And then the input determines output. So what kind of environment have you created? What kind of family culture and family legacy? What are they consuming in your home? Who's responsible for that? You are, man. So the music, the movies, the feelings, the conversations, the content that's available, the habits you're instilling. If your kind of family culture has been built around the TV and video games, that's on you, man. Or whether it's been built around great books and great conversations, that's on you. You know, the area you live, the friends and associations you have, that's all on you. Man, if you don't like the school, you don't like your church congregation, go somewhere else. And if you feel confined by rules or regulations or boundaries, who cares, man? Kids come first. Do what you have to do for your kids. There are times to break the rules, to break the boundaries, to go against the social norms or expectations or, you know, all these cultural conditioning. Just buck that whole system. Do what you have to do for your kid. Pay the price. Make it happen. Be a world-class dad. Be the man. And reminder, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for caring. Thanks for caring enough to be here. Right? Thanks for loving your kids. Thanks for trying. I know I'm dropping the hammer here on some things, and I mean to. Right? There's a time to just shake this up and be better. But join me in sharing this. Take a screenshot of it wherever you're listening to it. Share it on social. Share it with friends, family, colleagues. We need to share this message. And the more good dads, the more good kids. And the more good kids, the more friends that are, and future spouses that our kids will have, and future leaders in business and in politics. Man, this stuff matters so much. So remember, share it. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and you can leave a rating up to 5 stars and connect with me. And if you have specific questions, shoot them over. I'd be happy to do a podcast on it. Let's lean in, brothers. This is the most important work we'll ever do. And I hope we treat it that way. Be world-class dads. No more being a dictator dad. Learn how to communicate and to love and persuade. Develop the skill set and the heart set and the mindset to be a great dad. Be a man.